let's get started. If the first question I have is just, could you please introduce yourself? So name, pronouns, anything you'd like to share about who you are and what you do, plus a quick fun fact. And we'll go with Arya first.
Yeah, so my name is Arya, Jeipea, Karijo, and I am a transgender woman. I'm a Kenyan transgender woman. I like using that as the first bit. And interesting things about me. Well, I'm the feminist and LBQ GNC space in Kenya. So an activist. I write. Last year I was with Open Democracy as a journalist, and this year I'm doing communications for YES SHRI, and they're an indigenous funder in East Africa. But what is also important for today's conversation is that I also work with an online campaign known as Who's Knowledge. And the purpose of this online campaign is to decolonize the internet. So yeah, and that's why today's topic is really interesting for me. Fun fact, oh boy. Geez, let me see. Fun fact. Well, I have a lesbian NB daughter, and they're 20 years old, and they moved out. And I insisted that they move out like where I can see from my window. so it's I will need binoculars to see the house. But yeah, that's the kind of mother I am.
Go ahead, Shubha.
Hi, I'm Shubha Chacko, and I'm from Bangalore in India, and I go by she and her. And I've I work with an organization called Solidarity Foundation, and we support grassroots level efforts in South India, basically leadership building and social entitlements, dealing with issues around violence. And yeah, and I'm really, really happy to be here. And a fun fact about me is that I love music, but I can't sing to save my life. So, but I do try sometimes when nobody's listening and nobody's around. so, so if you really, if yeah, so I promise not to try today.
Okay. Hi everyone, my name is Umut. I'm from Colombia. Right now, I do very much activism and LGBTQI rights here and digital rights because I'm working with ISO in the Jew Observatory of ISO, Internet Society. Also, what I can say a fun fact about me? There are, well, I don't know, maybe actually seems pretty shy, but what the things that I love the most is to perform in the stage.
Thank you so much, everyone, for your really wonderful introductions. And without further ado, I think we're just going to jump straight into the questions that Shirvani has written for all of you to answer today. So the first one is, this is very open-ended, are there any cultures or societal frameworks of note under which you've interacted with the concepts of gender or anything, gender adjacent or related to gender? And we're going to go in the reverse directions. We're going to start off with Umut and then go to Shubha and then Arya last.
Well, understanding gender here in Latin America is totally different from the Western point of view. Even many consider that we are Westerners, but actually we aren't because gender is more, it's go more beyond just an identity or binary. It's just not that way. We don't understand it that way very much in general. Even we try to put everything in boxes because we want to be in the paradigm of the Western culture, because we are in the Western culture. But, but at the same time, we had um, these own identities that are out of this way of seeing the gender. For example, we have ways to call women that behave more like a masculine way, or men that behave more like a feminine way, but they aren't related with the sexual orientation. It's just more like a gender identity, but at the same time, it's not like a regular gender identity. It's not like the binary gender identity. It's like another thing, another layer of gender. And so for us, it's it's different in the way we understand gender. Even we don't realize that we understand gender in that way. That happened pretty much here, and it's quite interesting. Pretty much for me, it's really interesting because most of the people I live in the Caribbean part of Colombia. So the Caribbean part of Colombia is a really, I don't know how to say it in English, machista, or macho culture. So I think it's that. So they 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 try to fit into the categories, or the two categories of men and women, but they actually don't behave in that way. Most of the people are always in a kind of spectrum gender. So, and we have different names, totally different names for that spectrum of genders that doesn't have to be related with being feminine or being masculine. It's just being closer to what kind of expected behavior or further of that behavior. It's just that, and they don't realize that actually we had that kind of thing inside our culture. So it's for me, it's really interesting being part of this Colombia, because this doesn't happen really in other parts of Colombia, that kind of thing. Yes, I think it's Shubha. That's pretty much what I had to say right now.
Okay. Thanks, Umut, for that. And I think there's some similarity in the way, people don't fit in those boxes that are conceived as the binaries. So I just want to tell you a little bit about Lakshman Bhonsle. Lakshman Bhonsle is uh, lives in a small town in the state that I come from, and he uh, wears female attire. He wears a sari, and he performs folk music very beautifully. He writes very well, and he, says that he has been possessed by a goddess, and that is how he has been changed or transformed. So appears in feminine attire, and but continues to use a masculine name and goes by the he pronoun. And now, and then I just want to talk a few seconds about Bibi Jan, who is another Jogapa. That means again a person who says that the goddess possessed her, and then she became, she was transformed because of this possession. That means she was considered male, but the goddess made her female. Now, Bibi Jan also transgresses one more sort of, besides the gender uh, norms, because she comes from a Muslim family, and the goddess is considered not really Hindu, but from the subaltern kind of tradition. So somewhere Hindu. So then, so therefore, um, you know, the transgressions are not just of gender, but they're transgressions of so-called religious boundaries and borders. And that's what I want to say, that, you know, some of these spaces offer you a chance to be who you are, not only in terms of your gender identity, but also in terms of, you know, your religious or faith, where you feel comfortable with. Bibi Jan doesn't feel she has stopped being a Muslim and become a Hindu. She feels she's a Muslim who embraces Yalama. So she doesn't see these as contradictory. Just like Lakshman doesn't see his identity as having become a woman, he sees himself as Lakshman, a man, but but also a woman. You know, so it's not seen as binaries or dual, but this two seem to exist without. I'm not saying it's without. And for Lakshmanji, there doesn't seem to be too much of a. There's no contradiction in this. You know, this is how he is. So I'm just giving you those to say that uh, there is this religious cultural space that exists, even, and I'm not for a moment positing West versus East, like, binary again. We don't do binaries, do we? So, and then also I also don't want to pretend that these spaces in India are all very beautiful and lovely, and because there is deep patriarchy and there is deep casteism, which permeates all aspects of our lives, and we cannot pretend that don't exist. So that's just my opening remarks. Thank you so much.
Well, it's very interesting, the part where you said about Lakshman feeling like the spirit has taken over themselves, and it's an interesting concept that's found in a lot of African cultures. And so let me see if I can find examples. So in one of the tribes I come from, well, the thing is, for a lot of people in our 30s, 40s, most likely, like in Kenya, we are now like mixed tribes. So you come from a whole bunch of different origins. And so from one of my tribes of origin, we used to have, well, when I was in grade school, primary school, I was told there were medicine men in our tribe. But after growing up and figuring out my own transgender identity, and then I go back to read about these medicine men I was taught about. And then I find out these people in my tribe were called the Mugwe. That's Mugwe. And they were born male, but then dressed, wore their hair like the women of the tribe, and then they will bless the tribe with the left hand, and that represented femininity. And the whole thinking behind that was that the power of the divine as the Mugwe would balance the power of the warriors, who are like very masculine, always engaged in war and raiding other tribes. And so the tribe had this whole concept that there needed to be a duality. There needed to be a balance between this fighting side and the side which guided the tribe spiritually. That's the Meru of Kenya. But well, now in modern times, there's no way I'm gonna go back to my rural area or tribe and tell them, I'm just like the Mugu of the tribe. They're going to stone me because this what I am now is considered an African, which is very amusing. So yeah, if you ask any person about African culture, the culture they explain to you is really an adaptation of Victorian culture with some sprinkling of African practices, and that's what they say is African culture. And it's so permeated because, like, I think in 2019, Kenya had the trial where we're trying to get LGBT people decriminalized, and the judge in the ruling said, these people are living against African culture, national values, And for me it was so amusing. I was like, wait, which African culture are we talking about? Is it the real African culture, or are we talking about this Victorian culture, which is very androcentric, heterocentric, that we've now adopted as we now call our own? And for me it's sad because, well, if it wasn't for me being transgender, there's no way I would have found out these things, because my own search for myself is what led me to seek culture, look for stories, anthropology papers and stuff like that, just to figure out someone like me had to have existed in this past that was African. And so with this study, I've just realized it's not just the Meru in Kenya. The outside Nigeria had people like me who are called the Andaudu, again existed outside of the binary. In Uganda, we had Mudoko Dauku, again a gender that existed outside of men and what we call now men and women. Which are, and there's a lot of this, again, a lot of them are connected to spirituality. If you look at the tribes in Angola, people who existed outside as the third gender were also the diviners, who are known as Zivbanda, Gangas. They had all these names. And so, the thing is, one, in the culture we are in now, well, in modern society, we can't go back to those names. They do not mean anything to the tribes that held them, and which is a bit sad, because so I'm stuck here using the name transgender, but my tribe somewhere in the past, somewhere in 100, 200 years ago, had a name for people like me. And so that's a bit sad, the fact that there's whole cultures that were erased in order to make colonization possible, and the fact that post-colonial societies are never going to be able to go back to whatever they had. So that's totally lost to us. And that's almost. There's one more thing, and this one was very interesting. There's a book by Dr. Oyironke Oyewumi. She's Nigerian, and she has this book called The Invention of Women. So in the Yoruba culture, they recognized reproductive roles, which they called Obinrin and Okunrin, but reproductive roles did not mean gender roles. So women could, if you had a skill like hunting or fighting, you would lead the tribe in fighting and you will become a chief. But when the British came, all of a sudden they picked all the male chiefs and left the women. The boys went to school and the women were left, the girls were left. And so post independence, then there's this whole category called women. But the category was mostly used to refer as a white woman as the standard for this. So all of a sudden, women who are chiefs and warriors found themselves again at the very bottom of society without education and at an even lesser position than the white woman because of race. So that's kind of the sum up of what Africa is like now. So, and she calls it the invention of women because they did not have that word for themselves. So so gender is like it. Well, I mean, it's a blessing to have had this chance to delve into it, but it's also messy the kind of situation it is, like what we are in now, because it's hard to fix or to chart a way forward on what it should look like.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing, all of you, for sharing, your experiences with these frameworks and kind of like the ways in which a lot of the Western binaries and Western concepts of gender they aren't really compatible with the lived experience of a lot of individuals in the places where you are. In particular with Arya, you ended on a very easy segue for me into like the next question on how, are there situations in which you've experienced Western frameworks and approaches to gender that kind of overshadow other approaches to this concept. You had already touched upon how entire cultures that had completely different understandings of gender had been totally erased just for the purpose of making colonization possible. I was just wondering if there's any other experiences that you'd like to share about how Western frameworks have become dominant or overshadowed the beautiful cultures that were there, that were dominant previously. And then we'll go in the reverse order. So we'll do Arya and then Shubha and then Umut this time.
Thank you, Arjun. Well, yeah, I mean, I mentioned the case we had for decriminalization in Kenya. And if we're looking at whatever cultures we had pre-colonization, then would have ruled to stop criminalizing people for same gender love. So that's one of the sad effects, because cultures which were well, using modern terms now, cultures which are queer friendly. I mean, in our culture, that queer wasn't a word, but yeah, cultures which are queer friendly are now like the most homophobic. So, like I mentioned, the Hausa, now it's now one of the most homophobic tribes in Nigeria. Same with my tribe. Again, I can't go there dressed like this, as a trans woman. I'll get beaten up or something. And yeah, so it's sad. It's sad the fact that we had kind of superior cultures which recognize diversity and the existence of other things, but now we are struggling with homophobia and transphobia, and I mean, these words wouldn't even have existed, but now we are struggling with such things. And yeah, so that's one of the sad things. So 32 countries in Africa currently criminalize same gender love. And then, of course, people are different, like trans people will get caught up in that whole, yeah, you'll be targeted for looking different, for being different. And out of the 32, 4 of these countries, the sentence is death. So it's death penalty for, for having a particular sexuality or for existing in a particular gender. So the fact that there's a portion of humanity that cannot love or cannot exist as themselves because the countries they live in already criminalize them is, for me, that's the saddest effect of this whole cultural erasure. And it's also sad the fact that now it's kind of reverse roles. It looks like, so anytime a trans person or a lesbian person will speak in Kenyan circles, they're usually accused of, oh, you're borrowing Western culture. And it's sad that now the societal perspective, they feel that Western culture is coming to save these particular groups, but the fact is Western culture is what put these groups in the mess they are in right now. And yeah, it's a very upside down situation. And many of the tribes, some of the tribes that had like women to women marriages, yeah, they kind of are ashamed of it. So if you ask a Kamba woman or a Kikuyu woman, like your tribe had women marrying each other, they will either deny it or make it look like it was only for practical purposes. It was for inheritance or to have a son in the lineage, which was true. Those were some of the purposes of this kind of marriages. But also the women had like a relationship between them. And the very funny and sad fact was that the people who wrote about us, because we couldn't write about ourselves. So we have like a ethnographic study by Louis Leakey, and he wrote almost 1,000 pages about the Kikuyu, and he had 2 pages talking about women to women relationships. And when he was asked, this seems like an important part, why didn't you write more about it? And he said, I couldn't talk to these women, so I asked the men about them. And so I only wrote what the men told me about these particular women. Well, at least Leakey wrote them. Another colonizer known as Lugat reported back to England and said, these women who have other women as slaves. And he was talking about the women who are in relationships with each other. So it's very, yeah, it's sad because now even in written knowledge, these truths are kind of underrepresented, and it's a whole uphill task to start, putting them on like Wikipedia or places where this knowledge is publicly available.
Please go ahead, Shubha.
Thanks. Thanks. So, yeah, I think, what Arya was saying about how um, the notion that, there's a certain kind of progress and that we are sort of backward and we have to move to catch up with the West, and that kind of thing keeps coming back in various ways through international donors as well as other kinds of interventions. And it's a sort of dilemma because on one hand, you'd want to claim a universality and you want to make claims to say universal human rights and and other sort of become subjects that the government can recognize and deal with, in categories that they can then give you some benefits. Uh, but so, like for example, now in India, because there's some progress on trans issues, there's many issues of who are the true trans people. There's some debate about, to so that the state can then do it only for the true trans people and not for the imposters. There's a lot of debate around the authentic trans people, and so that the state recognizes it. And so on one hand, there is a thing of getting access to certain benefits and certain universalities that other people can link to and understand. But at the same time, certain sort of practices and certain, which may not fit into those. For example, there was a couple of, there were two women who were living together and, they said they wanted to marry, they'd married each other. And the way they explained it to the village was, they said that in our previous birth, we were husband and wife, and so the souls have moved into new bodies, and this time it's two women. But since we have a concept of marriage for 7 generations, or births, not generation, 7 births because of the reincarnation theory, then I have to be with this person because this person is my husband, and the village sort of accepted that. But so when someone was saying, so are you a lesbian woman? And she said, no, I'm not, because I'm married to a man, which is because the soul is male. And, so how do you explain this in terms of an international? So it's so many people will fall out because of the definitions. But at the same time, there is some need for administrative, legal protections, etc. There is also a need to claim a certain universal, and then the universal unfortunately gets defined by the Western idea of the universal, so that becomes universal. Somehow we from the global South are not saying this is what is universal.
Okay.
Umut?
Okay. Well, I'm thinking about this in terms of colonization and decolonization, especially because I live in a country where a lot of indigenous peoples, a lot of group of indigenous people still exist, and have, and it's the third country with most Black people in all America. So many of the colonization things affect the way that we understand gender, and we understand religion, we understand pretty much everything. In the case of indigenous people, I see that some practices still remain about gender specific roles. For example, there is a tribe in the south of my country. The the men's are the ones that do the caring chores, and the women are the ones who are going to hunt on the jungle. So it's totally different gender roles there, and that was being the prevail even after the colonization. Um, but that no is that not the same case with the African that were enslaved here in Latin America. Many of many of them lost their cultures, lost their languages. So many of them lost their religions. Even there is some small efforts to try to keep the religion's practices, but there are like a mix of the African practices with the Catholic Church practices. So that gives us an idea, a pretty particular idea of what are the roles of the woman or the man inside or the culture here in Colombia. Even we had some people that actually until now had the same language that they having in Africa 500 years ago. So they keep the language, but they couldn't keep the religion and the ways or they see the gender and other stuff, because the Catholic Church was so strong and forced them to left their way, the sin they did, or left them some practices. So they had to change everything in the process of try to hide it using some African elements in the way they do the religious the religions with Catholic Church rites. So um, beside that, um, beside that, with the Afro-Colombians, I had to say the indigenous, they are pretty much, they conserve the languages pretty well. The idea, some ideas of genders, they aren't the same as we used to, as I said before, they are in the same that we understand them in pretty much. I think that the mix of these three elements of the Catholic Church, indigenous understanding of way of life, and African culture is actually that give us a understanding of gender beyond the binary, because there is something there that is still trying for us, that is still is trying to figure out how we in Latin America in general, because I think it's something from Latin America in general, we understand the gender. It's not the same. We know it's not the same. The being LGBTQI plus is more than that. That we have our own way to do it, but we don't know how to do it because we had to adapt to the, as Shua said, we had to adapt to the universal global norm that says that we all had to fit in the LGBTQI plus. Then,
Okay, well, thank you again, everyone, for sharing about, well, one, like the administrative violence as well as the erasure that can result from this universalization of, like, you know, the Western frameworks of gender. And I just kind of, on that note, want to ask all of you, how do you think that individuals and societies can benefit from moving away from the idea that the Western approach of gender is a standard or normal one? And in addition to that, do you think some of the biggest barriers might be in moving away from that concept and allowing for true inclusion and embracing of all gender identities, experiences, roles, etc., within society? And also, I'm going to request very quickly that we keep responses to maybe like 3 to 5 minutes now, just for the sake of the time of the panel. Shorter is preferable because we can also get people to have do Q&A at the end after this question. And we'll start off with Umut and go back to Arya.
Okay. Well, understanding gender besides beyond the Western vision of it, I think it will benefit us to know each other, to know each other as a society. I think it's the best thing that we can do. Actually, as someone as part of the global south, it makes us feel like actually we can make our own categories to understand our own things and to address our own problems, because they doesn't have to came from the Western point of view of things. It also can come from us. So for me, and defend that a lot. Even I remember that my thesis on cultural studies, I wanted to use the categories that we use in Colombia to refer to the representation of men in telenovelas, but they didn't want me. But I had to adapt all my thesis to the Western categories of how to understand masculinity, because that's what they asked me in the university. And I just think it's not correct to put someone to do that. If we want to make some progress in every level, we had to start to embrace our own categories. And because the categories make us, that give us a better understanding of how our society works. So for me, it's pretty much that.
Okay, thanks, Umut. I think I echo what Umut was saying about that it's actually liberating for everybody to understand that there is fluidity and not get into strict categorization because the categorization also leads to hierarchies of which is the better. And the fluidity means not only, as I said, not only fluidity in terms of gender identities or behaviors or attractions, desires, all of those. But the fluidity is also about your religious beliefs and faith beliefs. It's also about, for example, somebody will say, for this month, I'm vegetarian. And that seems to be, everyone understands what that means, that you can be a vegetarian for 1 month and then you can go back to not being a vegetarian, and then you can be vegetarian on some days. So you don't have to be fixed as, are you vegetarian or non-vegetarian, are you Muslim or Hindu? You can be some combination of these things. And I think uh, those things that got quite easily understood by many people and not needed to fix them in certain ways is getting erased. And now, in fact, it's leading to greater polarization. And especially considering the current dispensation that we have, where there's a homogenizing of identities, and this is very dangerous. So I think there is emancipatory potential. There's a possibility to go from the queer, LGBT, gender and sexual minorities, from there, that there's a possibility for other people to say that this fluidity means that we shouldn't go into the polarization thing, because identities are like that and they are moving and flexible and beautiful because they are so fluid. So I think there's a lot that other people can who are not engaged with these issues can learn and get from, and hopefully engage with and be richer for that. Arya?
Yeah, yeah, I totally agree with Shubha. The whole idea of the polarization, because right now what we have in the world is there's this whole struggle of transgender women, real women, and whenever I get that question, I laugh at it. I'm like, who defined real women? Because again, it's like the book I was talking about. This definition was done by a Victorian patriarchal society, and they said a real woman looks like this. They spend time in servitude in the kitchen for the man, and these are the boxes. And so whenever we adopted these cultures, women all over the world started struggling to tick this box of real women. And so when someone asks me, are you a real woman? I'll be like, no, I'm a real transgender woman. Because I did not define real woman, but I can define what it means for me to be a real African transgender woman. So in my own context, in my definition, I'll start from the cultural definitions and come all the way to what it means for me to be a Black African transgender woman in Kenya in 2021. And I think that's what we need to do, kind of take back definitions and be the one saying, this is who I am, and this is what my existence means in this time and place. And this is what my body needs to look like to host my my spirit or my being, so that if I'm doing any surgeries, I'm not doing them to fit, to take a real women box. I'm doing them because my spirit needs to function in a body that is in a certain way. So yeah, that's the first, I think, benefit people can have. The polarization will go once we move away from the binary and adopt our own definition of things. The biggest barriers I would say is these things. Colonization needed to build a social order, and the fact is our societies are still running with the same social order. And so anytime we talk about being transgender or having whatever sexual attraction or even sex characteristics, being intersex, the thing is, people feel the social order they are living in, the comfortable way that things have been structured for them, they feel this group are a disruption, and they fight these groups using religious reasons, cultural reasons, and I think that's the biggest barrier. And one way I can think of overcoming this is, again, putting knowledge out there, talking about one, what existed in culture, two, talking about what science is finding now, because there's a lot of scientific findings that explain, like for a trans person, there's a part of my brain that was formed in the first trimester of pregnancy that makes me the person I am. And so having this kind of knowledge put out there and becoming part of mainstream discussions kind of reduces the prejudices, breaks down the barriers a bit. And yeah, so for me, I believe knowledge is like the first step. And yeah, that's what I think, to commit to, to put out knowledge and to find it and then put it out there.
Fantastic, everyone. Thank you so much. These are amazing responses, and I'm learning so much every time I ask a question. It's so much fun moderating this panel. We have our first question that came in from Vishaka. How can we develop better vocabulary in other languages? Because it seems like our words define our worldview. Does anyone want to take that question?
Well, I can have a go. Oh, well, Shubha, go.
No, Arya, go first, please.
Well, I was gonna give an example from Pakistan. So Pakistan had the Hawaja Sira, which is like almost the equivalent of the Hijra, and they were criminalized in 1871. There was all Criminal Tribes Act, and this grouping was one of the groups that was said to be living outside of social order. And so for them to kind of fit in back into society, them and the government had to come up with like on the identification, they have Hawaja Sira male. So it's kind of like they're blending something that was in the culture and something from the new culture, the new learnings in biology. So they have Hawaja Sira male, Hawaja Sira female, and Kunsai Mushkil, which kind of refers to intersex people. So I think the way forward is more of like looking back at what the past was and then figuring out this is the kind of humanity you want to build. And that having that kind of idea is what gives us, these are the names we need to use for this kind of humaneness to exist. And yeah, well, it has helped a bit. I mean, there's still human rights violations for trans people in Pakistan, but that was like a huge step for them, being able to get IDs, to marry, and to even take part in elections. And it all came from this, taking this small bit of culture and putting it in a national system.
I think I echo that in the sense that there was something similar that happened, that trans people's rights have moved quite a bit in India. And I think in terms of language and words defining our worldview, I think so the need to, uh, allow people, I mean, not allow, but respect the way people define themselves, and, and not sort of force fit them into some other category that we have. Uh, but at the same time, it is obviously difficult, because when you're negotiating for rights, and you're negotiating with administrators, and you're negotiating at the hospital, and you're negotiating, then they want something that they can understand. So you tend to want to make it, legible for them, so that they can. So in that sense, you say, oh, this person is just like this, so it's like, you know, like a traditional dish that we eat called uttapam. Is uttapam like pizza, or is like pizza like uttapam? It depends where you're coming from. You know, like when I first saw pizza, I said this is like uttapam, because I was more familiar with uttapam. I didn't know what pizzas were, but somebody who's more familiar with pizzas will say the uttapam is like pizza. So yeah. Sorry to bring food in, but I bring that into every conversation.
You're making me so hungry, Shubha. I love uttapam so much, and so this is like.
I know, right?
Okay. Umut, would you like to share an answer as well? Or alternatively, I have one last question that we can do lightning round of. Up to you.
Well, what I had to say is, for me, it's a negotiation every time, because we had to address or ask for right for people, and they need to know exactly where you are in this category that already defined. But also we had to pay attention how the people call themselves. Yeah. uh, and start to write about those categories or those ways the people call themselves. And I had a pretty academical approach to this, because I came from communications. For me, language is really important, and how we call things is the main thing for me. So for me, it's really important that we pay attention how people call themselves and write in the way they are calling themselves, because that's the way I think we started to acknowledge those identities. So for me, that's all I had to say for now. Thank you.
Okay, we're gonna do another quick question, kind of like lightning style, just a 1 to 2 sentence. Uh, Fun fact or something you really like about like a cultural approach to gender that you think is neat and would like to share. And I see Shubha's response in the doc, so maybe Shubha can go first, and then it'll kind of give you an example of another one.
So some of the cishet men in some regions in India grow one fingernail very long, usually this finger, and they paint that, so they put nail polish.
Feel free to go, Umut or Arya. If you have a fact, otherwise it's no worries.
Well, I had this thing that actually caught my attention is that there are men here are more good at it than they are. They even take care themselves more than women. If you are me, they really have a lot of things to take care of themselves here more than women. And they understand gender in a way more than open than they think they seem to understand. They have that. Yeah.
Arya, would you like to go? Again, no worries if you don't want to, but
No, I can't think of any now. Mostly the ones that happen are the ones that come from just me existing as myself. And someone will be like, oh, let me help you, mommy. And so it's always amusing that just people will gender you based on appearance. And, so if you're looking masculine, you're going to carry your own loads. But the day you look feminine, everyone's like, oh, let me help you with that, And it's a bit of a Western borrowing and the assumption that, women are weaker, which again, technically is wrong. If you work out, you're just as strong as everyone else. But yeah, it's always amusing to see gender and having existed on, both sides of the binary and seeing how ridiculous it can be sometimes.
okay, thank you so much, everyone. This was an absolutely delightful panel, and like I had heard about so many great experiences and so many critical insights into the ways in which uh, gender is just so fluid and flexible and varies so much and has so much more diversity outside of like a lot of the Western frameworks, and also like some of the impact that these adoption of the Western frameworks in an erasure of cultures in other places has led to, violence, to terrible lived experiences. And again, I thank you so much for both being vulnerable and also sharing your knowledge about these topics with our community. The last thing I want to say is the majority of the AI community today and the machine learning community and NLP, computer vision, whatever else, like the researchers who are here at this conference, um, we're very Western centric, right? Like that kind of ends up being the case. Like the majority of our attendees are um, unfortunately, like, still from very concentrated parts of the world. And it's really great that you're sharing these experiences. And because I think it's important for all of us to understand these things when we're doing our own research. Increasingly, there's more focus on how technology intersects with gender and how technology is impacting gender minorities. But honestly, our analysis and our critical insights are not complete without the inclusion of, thinking of gender as, this fluid, flexible group of identities, not just, categories that fit within the Western framework. And in fact, like when these technologies if they adopt the like Western view of gender, then anytime that they're employed by administrations, they implicitly like are speeding up the process of this universalization that's so detrimental to so many folks. And so I just want everyone here to take the insights that they've learned from these amazing panelists today and think about it every time you're working on some kind of research problem, because I like strongly believe that you will find ways in which the wonderful insights shared today will relate to the research that you do like every single day. So thank you so much again, everyone. We love food examples from Vishaka. I just want to quickly share the link to the discussion Zoom. And if anyone here is interested in continuing the discussion, you can join us. You can join us here, and I'll be over there, and we'll do a little quick, like roundtable style discussion. But thank you again to all the panelists, and have a really good day.